Hello and welcome. My name is Colin Gearing and I'm Business Development Director for The Growth Company. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today on the first of a series of webinars, which is going to be examining what the Prime Minister yesterday referred to as one of the biggest public health issue for our generation. At this present moment in time, there's no shortage of news and information around coronavirus, from the numbers infected, from the countries impacted, through to panic buying and stories of the suspension of sporting events. We've got pretty much wall-to-wall coverage. But what's getting less attention in the media is the business impact on coronavirus and, crucially, the role that us businesses can play to battle the battle to delay the spread of coronavirus and reduce the impact it has on our country, our communities and our economy. This series of webinars is going to be looking at this global pandemic from the perspective of businesses. First and foremost, and the subject of today's conversation, we're going to be looking at what we can and must do to better look after our people and our employees as a duty of care. On Monday, we're going to be looking at business continuity issues like cash flow and supply chain management. On Wednesday, how remote and virtual working can play its part. And on Friday, we're going to be looking at the insurance and legal implications for businesses. You can look out for further seminars on hospitality, tourism and retail sectors coming up shortly as well. And I'm truly grateful to be joined today by three people who've given up their time to be with us. First of all, we've got Alison Loveday, who's a partner at Kennedy's. Alison's an expert in all aspects of employment law at Kennedy's, a global law firm with 58 offices around the world. And Alison has two main areas of focus, people and businesses. Chris Fletcher, who's the Marketing and Campaigns Director for Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce, which is the UK's largest chamber of commerce. Chris heads up the Chamber's marketing and campaigns activity and has strong relationships with businesses across the city region. And finally, we've got James Boffey, who's an advisor from ACAS. James trains businesses in good practice as part of the services that ACAS delivers. ACAS gives employees and employers free advice, impartial advice on workplace rights, rules and best practice. Now, we want you all to get involved. So if anyone's got any questions or comments, please get in touch by tagging us on at GrowthCo UK or using the hashtag C19GC. Or you can drop comments below the YouTube channel and remember to hit like and share. Now, to get us started, I want to ask each of our guests to give us their thoughts on the current situation and employers' duty of care. Alison.
Hi. So I thought I'd just outline some of the areas that I'm advising on or being asked about at the moment. Firstly, I think the starting point for employers is always health and safety. So we have statutory obligations to care for our employees, but also each employee has an obligation to care for their own health and safety. I think that's important to remember. Also, it extends beyond employees, so it will cover those affected by our work. So that could be customers, suppliers, self-employed, consultants. So it is quite broad. I think it's important that we take a risk assessment approach, which I think is what the government are doing and encouraging us to do. I heard somebody talking the other day and they said you don't climb a mountain by just doing a plan before you leave. You have to keep changing the plan according to the conditions and when you find the unexpected as you go. And I think that's where we are with this. So I think it's about keeping up to speed with the advice we get from the government, making sure we keep reassessing our plans and what we can do in the workplace to keep pace with that. I think that's also important for staff and for workforces because I think there's some misinformation and there are some gaps in information and that's making people very anxious. So to sort of minimise that, I think the more we can confirm what we can confirm, be very clear what we don't know. You know, we don't have to make things up. We don't know. It's fine to say, look, as soon as we know, we will fill that gap. But if you don't fill the gap, then that's when Chinese whispers start and you get, as I said, the spread of misinformation or fake news, as people like to call it now. So a few areas that I think Chris might cover is the aspects that were covered in the budget and the support the government has said that it will provide to businesses. My take on that is that the government is expecting quite a lot from business. As employers, it's going to need to stand up to the plate to help with the health crisis. I think that's going to be particularly important for frontline businesses like the care sector and hospitality. Unfortunately, those areas tend to be the lowest paid, so potentially short working or dealing with staff absences is going to be particularly hard, and it may personally impact people, a lot if they're not being paid and not working. So a lot of talk has been about the vulnerable and how we can best protect them. And I think that's not just from a health point of view, but also from a financial point of view. So I'm nearly done. I would just say it's important to remember it's one size doesn't fit all, and we need to take account of people's personal circumstances. So whilst communicating with your employees, it's really important that you have discussions. For example, somebody that's well set up to work from home may unexpectedly not be able to do that if they do decide to shut the schools. And finally, it's what I call tin hat time. We may all have to put our tin hats on right now, but it's really important to balance that against the need for being ready when hopefully this passes, and we all still want to have a business to run. So we can't just focus on the here and now. We need to look forward as well. So I'm looking forward to the discussion this morning because I think there's lots to cover.
Chris.
Yeah, there's a number of things. I mean, we were having a chat in the office yesterday, and we were just saying we can't really remember anything that's been like this before in the past that's suddenly come at such a pace, and the impact of it is still yet to be fully felt, really, to be quite honest, and which affects everybody. We come at this in the Chamber of Commerce from a couple of angles. And again, it is unique because, number one, we are employers. We've got staff. I'm a member of the senior management team. We've got to make sure that the staff at the Chamber understand that we're looking after them and giving them the best advice. And I think it's important what Alison said there. There's an awful lot of white noise around this issue at present. It's important you stick to the guidelines as they are out there. So we've got to look after our staff, but also our members. They're also businesses, and what affects us affects them as well. It affects the people around this table now. We're living it along with everybody else. So we've got that internal bit to look after. And then also a lot of our members approaching us saying, well, what do we need to do? What do I need to be saying to my staff? How do I make sure that staff aren't exposed, both from a health point of view, but also then from a business point of view as well. So we're seeing this from a wide range of angles, and everything from, work at home policies right through to that, if somebody starts to show signs in the office of being infected, then what do you do? And these are very real challenges. People may not have faced them up to now, but you've got to prepare for having to do this very soon over the next couple of weeks. That's not Project Fear, it's not panic. That's the reality, and this is what we're actually beginning to see happen right here and now. So this is huge, and everybody really is in this from the level of not being quite certain what to do, but also being sure that there is that support there to help them through whatever may lie ahead over the next couple of weeks.
Excellent. James?
Thanks, Colin. So our message is really mainly around communication and taking really practical steps. So think about how open and transparent you can be in terms of what your plans are in terms of reducing risk. What will you do if you do have to close down the business? Making sure that your staff are well aware of that and you are giving them as much up-to-date information as you possibly can. Other really practical things you can be doing, making sure you've got everybody's contact details. Do you have emergency contacts up to date? Are your managers currently briefed on spotting what the signs of coronavirus are? Do they know what to do if they suspect somebody does have coronavirus? And what are your policies say on sick pay if somebody goes off? Will somebody still be getting contractual sick pay even if they're self-isolating without being sick? So lots of things to consider there. It's going to require a lot of flexibility from managers, from you with your policies. How will you adapt to things like home working? How are you going to adapt to somebody not being able to get you a fit note, perhaps when you'd expect to? So lots and lots of flexibility required, and might open the door for some flexibility that you hadn't necessarily considered before. So it might be a positive thing in one respect. Other things we've started to consider. So my job, as you mentioned, is going around delivering training. Yeah. Some companies are starting to think, do we need to be doing that at the moment? Do we need to be getting together for non-essential meetings? Yeah. Could we be doing it via Skype video conference? So it really is practical things and keeping your employees as involved as possible from our perspective.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, guys. Really, really helpful way to kick us off. I just want to remind everybody who's listening live, that can tag GrowthCo UK or the hashtag C19GC to ask any questions or drop your questions below the YouTube video. Now, we've got our first question right now to kick us off, and that's a question that's come in to ask, how do we deal with workers whose family at home have shown signs and symptoms of the infection if they're not showing signs and symptoms themselves? At the moment, this organisation is letting them come into work, which they believe is the current government advice. And we mentioned before, the government advice is changing by the day, if not more frequently. But they believe that's the current government advice and guidance. However, is this correct for them to do? So I don't know who wants to kick us off by tackling that question.
I think it's a difficult one because there's a lot of information out there, but there's a lot of uncertainty and not clear guidance on these things. And again, we've seen this in similar situations with a couple of our members where one member's decided to do one thing and another's decided to do something else, and the third person's done something else as well. Yeah. I think you've got to take a very pragmatic view with this, and I think you've got to look at the wider implication of this, and it's the cost of not doing something. Personally speaking, if that was a situation that occurred in the office, I think we'd be looking at making sure that person in a way self-isolates. If somebody's in close proximity to them that is showing signs of the infection or whatever it may well be, I think really from the point of view of looking after the wider workforce, you've got to really have a conversation with that person and see if there's a way that they can work from home. Yeah. That not knowing the full circumstances behind it, but that to me seems the most obvious thing, because if you don't and ignore it and assume, well, it's just, it'll take care of itself, it won't.
I think that's the challenge, and we'll come on to maybe unpack this question a bit further, is the stuff that the law will require us to do, the stuff that the government's advising us to do, and then the stuff that we as people and human beings know that this is what we need to do to look after the people who we're responsible for. Yeah. And I think that's the difficult thing that everybody's trying to balance at the moment, is not wanting to get guidance or help in terms of understanding.
Yeah. It's a bit of a gut reaction. Alison mentioned it. There's a lot of announcements made in the budget on Wednesday. It seems like a lifetime ago. just 2 days ago, over the financial support for businesses. But again, it's still not clear how some of that is actually going to be delivered on the ground. And again, that sort of gut feeling about doing the right thing.
Yes.
Sometimes in circumstances like this, we're going into uncharted territory with a lot of this stuff. I've never had to make these decisions and have these discussions that I've done in 30, nearly 40 years worth of work and a career. So, we are feeling our way through. There is law, there is guidance. We follow that. We follow the official guidance, but there will always be circumstances that you've just got to say, right, that feels like the right thing to do. Or actually, for the bigger picture stuff, we've got to do that.
Yeah, I'll just come in on that. I completely agree. I think it's back to risk assessing it. So even though my understanding is that technically right now the government is saying they're not asking families to self-isolate, if that person continues to come into work, are any of their colleagues going to want to work with them, for one? Probably not. Yeah. And then also, I think it has wider impacts. So, for example, if somebody in the office would like to go and visit their elderly parents, they may then think, well, I can't go and see them because I could be carrying, even though I'm not ill. So I think the reach of the impact each of us has is actually really quite extensive. Yeah. So, I think you'd have to look at the personal circumstances of that individual, but the likelihood is, my understanding is, it is a very contagious virus, so they are likely to catch it, so they're going to be off at some point anyway, so maybe start now.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. I think it is about having a frank conversation with that person and saying, well, is it just they're presenting with symptoms? Have they got any further advice? Are you just sort of not making it up, but are you just speculating that that this person is demonstrating these symptoms, or is it something that you have got advice on? And if so, then it might be that, can we explore working from home? I think the difficulty is in roles where that isn't possible. Do we need to consider that person going off sick, self-isolating? You may have similar issues if somebody just says, I'm fearful of coming into work. Because I might catch it from somebody else, and perhaps it is they've got elderly relatives. So it's those conversations of, well, do you want to take some leave? Can we facilitate that? Can you work from home? And just working through those practicalities. And
that's the challenge with the moving, how fast the agenda's moving. So if this question would have come in yesterday, we would have said, well, phone 111. And by the time of the Prime Minister's news conference yesterday, they were trying to reduce the strain on 111 and directing people more to web-based self-help. And that's the challenge that we're all going to have to try and navigate together, is how we can keep up with what we should be doing. But also, I think fundamentally it goes back to what you said, Chris, about the judgment. And it's about really, we're making these calls as people. And I think that's a big valuable lesson.
But also, we can all have the same information and come to a very different conclusion. And I think that is a big issue.
And more.
And I think going back to, you mentioned Kennedy's as a business has lots of international offices. And one of the things that is very clear is how differently this virus is being treated internationally. And unfortunately, I think that causes more anxiety because people are looking around and thinking, well, if they're doing that in Spain or France or Ireland, why aren't we doing it here? And should we be doing more? And what aren't we being told? So I think I'm sure we will get greater clarity on that as this progresses. But right here and now, I still think there's concerns about that.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you very much. I think we've got another question just come in. What do we do if we suspect an employee has come into work and they have coronavirus? It's entirely understandable that, I think the numbers of people that have been tested for coronavirus, the negatives far outweigh the positives. So that's people with symptoms. And again, this is another tricky, thorny question, that if an employer suspects that one of their employees has come in with coronavirus, how do they handle it?
I think the guidance on this is actually fairly clear. So Public Health England are certainly making it apparent that it doesn't mean that you've got to close the workforce down. You will be if somebody is tested for contacted by somebody from your local Public Health England branch. But the advice, if you suspect, is to get them to at least 2 meters away from people within the workforce. Where possible, get them into a room behind a closed door. As sort of draconian as that might sound, try and keep them as far away from people and touching as many things as you possibly can. The guidance as well is if they could be using a separate bathroom whilst they're still in the workplace, then that's a good thing to be happening as well. And then for them to use their own phone to make contact, probably with 111.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone anything else to add? Because
I think, again, in circumstances like that where there is clear guidance, then, the key thing in this is follow the guidance,
I think you'd like to think now that people, if they wake up with symptoms, are not going to come into work now, and that they'll understand the guidance has changed and that they should be staying from home, hopefully.
I think
but
it
not
depends on
everybody
what their
will.
circumstances are as well, because if they're not going to get paid the same if they stay away, there's an awful lot of individual and behavioural incentives, aren't there, that are working against some of the public policy and public health objectives.
And also the time of year, so you can think, well, I've just got a bit of a cold.
Yeah. Great. So next question is, the Prime Minister yesterday talked about delays and the importance of delaying to flatten the peak, but also elongate it. Businesses, obviously, you can see that there's a benefit if businesses are able to do that themselves in terms of maintaining and managing absence over a longer period of time rather than all at once. So do you think there's any particular measures that businesses can put in place to help delay the spread within their own workplace?
I think there's a couple of things, a couple of examples we've come across where businesses are sort of, wherever possible, trying to almost operate another rota of staff. So obviously you need people on certain premises at times. So it's very much a case of, sort of stripping that down to an absolute bare minimum and then making sure you've not got all the staff in at the same time. If there's people that can work away from home or whatever, work from home, then do that and almost do it on a sort of rota basis. So your chance of cross-infection from your workforce is slimming down and it's extending it, but the business is still running. We don't want to get into the situation where it's a very draconian, shutting workplaces down, because that has an immediate impact on a business. And again, as Alison said, there's not much of a business left to go back to in September or October, So it's a case really of how you can comfortably do that. But again, it's this balance between the economic, keeping the business running, and also your employees' health and making sure that they are okay and they're safe and they feel comforted with whatever you do as well. So I think we'll see, I think over the next few weeks, different models like this beginning to come out, where it's a case of keeping the business going for as long as you possibly can, and minimising the exposure of people to, either the journey in or when they're actually in the workplace.
Yeah.
But it's not completely avoidable. There will be circumstances when, people will be exposed or put in positions where they may well be exposed.
Yeah, I think it's worth as well, sort of whatever measures you put in are likely to cause outlying employment relations issues, so it's worth predicting what they might be at this point as well. So if we've got a workforce where half of us can work from home and half can't because we run a manufacturing side, and I've got to be coming in, how are we going to manage well, why don't they have to come in, or why are they allowed to carry on working, whatever the case may be. So again, coming back to that communication of, well, this is why they're allowed to work from home, because their role allows for it, and the reason that we're expecting and hoping that they will do that is to protect you just as much as it works the other way around. Actually, the reason that they're not coming in is because that travel is unnecessary for them, and it will massively reduce the risk for the people remaining in the workplace.
In the front line,
no, I think all of that is spot on. I think we've seen a few different things. So as Chris said, some people are saying 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, and splitting the people that are in the office. I think other areas that are being considered, and as you said, James, that means maybe some variation of terms and conditions and policies. So the things that normally work very well all of a sudden are not going to, so people will not have their contractual hours, for example. That can have an impact then on their pay. So, can you get the workforce to agree a variation of that for the greater good, if you like, of the whole workforce? So hopefully everybody gets some hours and some money, but you will have some people within that who simply can't afford to. So how do you balance off those different personal needs? I think another area that we're being consulted on is unfortunately there is some harassing and discriminatory and racist behaviour going on. As employers, then you are potentially responsible for those sorts of acts by your employees. So it's important that that's, as shocking as it may sound, it does happen. So just need to be alive to it. And when you're making decisions as to who should or shouldn't be coming into work, make sure that you can back up your decision making and it doesn't have any, element of that in it.
So communication.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, next question is one particularly around business travel, but I think we can probably broaden that question out to think about travel more generally. But what would your advice be to businesses that feel that they still have a need to travel, and in terms of beyond, obviously there's very clear guidance from the government in terms of don't go to these places, but obviously people will go travel for business, they'll travel to commute, and they'll travel to go on holiday. So what advice have we got for businesses dealing with employees and their travel logistics?
I think some of it is again, be sensible about this stuff, and also that risk assessment bit as well. Look at what it's actually for, and again, we've seen a couple of conferences whereby the decision has been taken to postpone them and delay them, not for the general health bit, but because of exhibitors turning around saying, well, actually, we don't really want our workforce exposed to a large crowd at this time. So the exhibitors started to pull away from it, and which resulted obviously then in the conference being cancelled. And again, speaking to some businesses, they've already taken decisions to sort of travel only in exceptional circumstances, not just abroad. Obviously, there's very clear guidelines there, but even domestically as well within the UK, going down to London or going up to Glasgow or wherever it may be, it's got to be for a specific business purpose, and in some cases by exception. These are already in place, and in a way they're preempting, as I said, what the next stage may well be of official government advice. Some businesses are already putting this into place. I know next week you're talking about technology and being able to work remotely. Some of that already exists there, so can it be done in a different way? But sometimes you've got to meet people, and again, this is where it's not one size fits all. It's different circumstances for doing things. I suppose at the end of the day, and again with the lack of official advice from government over what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing. I think it's down to each individual business to again just look at those circumstances and work out what's best for the staff.
Yeah.
In some cases, staff is, may well turn around and say, actually, we don't want to expose ourselves to doing that, and they take the decision almost to not travel, which makes that decision a little bit easier sometimes. So again, there's a wide variety of circumstances here, but ultimately it's got to be making sure your people are safe.
Yeah, I think it is worth thinking about the question though, what if the employee says, actually, I'm just not going to travel anyway. I don't really care what the employer thinks, I'm protecting myself. I think you've got to have that conversation about why do you think that's necessary? We think it's safe, we've assessed it. If somebody has a very good reason, then perhaps you look at, could somebody else be doing it? Is there a way of doing this in an alternative manner? So it might be using technology to avoid it. So just working through those concerns. But I mean, ultimately, an employee is running a risk if they're going to take that hard line. But I think for an employer to be as reasonable as possible at the minute, and well, could we be doing this a different way? Is it absolutely essential?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think a lot of non-essential business travel's already been stopped. I think that's very evident from certainly the last few train journeys I've done. They've been almost the only one in a carriage. And my understanding, although I haven't flown anywhere, is that a lot of the airports are very quiet.
Yes.
So I think businesses and individuals are making those decisions already for themselves. But I do think, as James said, if you had a meeting that you really thought had to take place, would you be reasonable as an employer to try and insist that an employee attend if they didn't want to? I think you'd be in difficulty.
I mean, the latest predictions are that this is going to be with us for quite some time, which will run into more peak holiday time. So in terms of personal travel, where does the employer duty of care begin and end, or where does the employer's duty of care to its existing workforce around people's travel choices?
I think that depends where they're planning on going.
Yeah. But does the employer able to ask them? Obviously,
I think you would issue guidance. I think that's already happening to say, well, fine, if you go here and here, that's fine. If you go, for example, to Italy, then when you come back, you won't be able to come into the workforce. You will have to self-isolate because of it being a key hotspot, and then being very clear on what the financial implications of that might be, if there are any.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I mean, ultimately, you can't say no, you can't go to Italy. Although why you'd be thinking of going to Italy now?
Who knows?
I don't know what you'd be doing, but you can't say no, you can't go there. But working through actually, do you understand what that will mean for you when you do come back? It will be classed as sick leave. This is our sick pay. I think is really, really important.
Yeah.
As we said earlier, I think there'll be a lot of staycations this summer.
A lot of staycations,
if people go anywhere.
and self-isolations as well. So I think it's probably worth just touching on that in terms of many people will be able to do some work or their entire job while self-isolating and while they're not sick. What do you think, what's the employer's role really in terms of supporting people during that period of self-isolation, both from how do they maintain reproductive output from that person, and also how do they make sure that they're okay and not dealing with some of the extremities that sometimes suddenly being forced to be isolated for 2 weeks would impact all of us in a whole host of ways?
I think it's an interesting one because again, it's I suppose it's that regular contact, isn't it, that you've got to keep in touch. And again, we were having a chat previously, weren't we, saying around, how some of us would, probably be crawling up the walls if we weren't in the office from time to time. And while, working from home is a lot more recognised these days in a lot of workplaces, it isn't in many. And for some people, this may be the first time that they've had to do that, both from an employer and an employee point of view. I think as an employer, I think it's important that in circumstances like that, you keep up that regular contact with staff. They're obviously self-isolated for a particular reason. And I think one thing that annoys me a little bit is when people just see it as, it's an extra 2 weeks off work or whatever it is. There's a reason behind that, and you may very well end up very ill. Let's not, kid ourselves in why people are doing it, as well as it being a prevention measure. So it's important from that point of view that, as an employer, you do keep in touch with people to make sure that the health is is okay. But also as well is that they can deliver what you're thinking they're delivering. You're not making them, putting them in an awkward position, or you're asking them to do whatever it may well be, and they can only do some of it because they haven't got the technology or the tools at home or whatever it is to actually do it. Those sort of things is where these, when you're working remotely and whatever, that's where the tension starts to build up and where things, start to get tricky. So I think that regular contact with people is vitally important. But also in the first instance, I think businesses now really do start to have a look at how feasible and how able they are to, for their employees to work remotely. It's one thing to say, we'll work from home. If that employee then, tries to log on or whatever it may well be and they can't, how do you sort that out?
Yeah.
Because nobody's going to go out and visit the home to sort it out. So we've got to really start to think about these things now, and make sure that employees don't feel, forgotten about, and they're out there and ignore them.
Yeah,
I think that's right, and I think the time to be doing, as we said, with contingency planning is testing now. So you want everybody, even if they're not having to self-isolate now, and even if the workplace is open, you've got to anticipate it might have to close. And I think even if the workforce is used to some members of the team working remotely, if you've got a situation where everybody needs to, have you got enough licenses? Will the IT actually support that number of people? So some really practical things. And then I think, having a home working policy is really important. Some people will need to check their home insurance. There's, all sorts of things. Have they actually got a safe place to work at home? So quite a lot that can be done in advance, even if you don't need to implement it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Our guidance would certainly echo everything that's been mentioned there, certainly around the maintain contact, but have those conversations beforehand. What does working at home look like for you? Is that safe space there? I think it is worth bearing in mind as well, what is that self-isolation period looking like? Is it you're self-isolating because you're potentially at risk, or are you self-isolating because you're ill? In which case, are you genuinely, and we hear this not necessarily just in relation to coronavirus of, I'm not well enough to come to work today, I'll work from home. Okay, well, we need to have a conversation about what that really means.
Yeah.
Is it that you're producing what we would expect? Or is it that, you're just going to log on and look at a few emails? We need to have that conversation about what that means. Alison mentioned, I think before we came on, about it's all well and good saying you can work from home, but then the schools might close. So managers need to be aware of what that situation looks like. Because if I've got, I've got a 3-month-old, I can't work from home whilst he's at home. Because he is a full-time job in himself.
So have you got your self-isolation location picked out? Have you got man caves?
But if I'm a parent with a 16-year-old that's coming home from school,
they're even worse.
But all I might need to do is check in on them. What if they're really ill, just take them a cup of tea. I can probably still be working from home at that time. So that, again, really, really open and frank conversations are the way to manage that.
I think that's a really important point you said there, James, because this again is some of the scale that we're facing here from the point of view of it's not just one business somewhere, it's potentially everybody everywhere, and that bit around working from home, self-isolation, and then the schools close, and then we've got to be aware of these things, and you can go 100% now into full panic mode and start to think about it, or you can proportionately start to look at these things as you come through. But that preparation bit, that contingency planning, is absolutely vital. That we start to do that now, and again, it may not be something you wish to do openly in the office and create panic. But, as responsible managers, everybody should be thinking about these things now, looking at what plans are in place and, beginning to ask maybe the what if questions, like that. That's a really important point.
Excellent. So looking at, so we've spoke a lot about working from home, and for some jobs that's going to be completely impractical, and for others it's going to be technically possible, but technically impossible because we don't have the technology. So I think one of the key things I've been seeing come out of a lot of articles is that one of the impacts of this for businesses could be a fundamental change to the long-term way that people think about work and the way people think about traveling. So I mean, obviously this is we're right in the middle of dealing with a pandemic at the moment, but do we think that this is going to have a prolonged and actually game-changing impact in the way that people work going forward and the way that businesses need to think about how they equip people to work?
I think there's certainly a possibility of that. I mentioned right at the beginning that there could be some positives that fall out of this from a business perspective. Do we need everybody in the office all the time? There tends to be a thinking at the moment from a lot of employers of why should we have flexibility? I think the question might be now turning into the why shouldn't we? Actually, we've seen loads of benefits from this, perhaps. We've realised that it is absolutely a possibility. So let's think about the ways that flexibility can benefit us, because we might have been better able to cope with this pandemic had we already had those functions in place, as opposed to it being we're now having to change things in the middle of this panic
long-term
moment.
resilience, which is obviously subject of another webinar, but I think it is absolutely perfectly suited here as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's fine when we're talking about office jobs.
Exactly,
but obviously there's so many jobs where it's just not going to be possible. You can't do your job without, whether it's manufacturing or hospitality or care home, you have to go to your place of work to deliver your work. Yeah. And that's where this is going to really bite, I think.
Yeah. And again, it is that bit, isn't it? It's, keep saying it, only one size does not fit all. And then this is really, again, that scale of the issue where it is everybody from people that can do work from home very easily to the ones that are actually there looking after the people that are sick.
Yeah, I think one good thing that I think partly a Brexit thing, but definitely a pandemic thing, is looking at things like, how are you going to keep in contact with your customers? How are you going to make sure you've got all the details for your staff? What about your self-employed consultants? Yes. Looking at the broader reach and making sure you've got some flexibility. If you can't use your supplier in China or Italy, have you got other people lined up that you could use? Also looking at your terms of business. I've been contacted recently with people sort of in the events and hospitality space where things are being cancelled, and what is their cancellation policy? It's not something that they've really focused on in the past, because it hasn't been, it'd be quite an occasional thing, whereas now literally things are coming out the diary and their whole business is drifting away. So they're looking at maybe they can't introduce it to the arrangements that are already there necessarily, but looking at perhaps having a non-refundable deposit, so at least if this were, they'll have some income even if an event can't go ahead. So I think some of the business planning and contingency planning would be a good thing once we're out the other end. Yeah,
which is a perfect advertisement and segue to the very next webinar on Monday. I think the same time, same channel. If you subscribe and hit like, then you'll be first to know. I think we're about to wrap up. I think we've got the last 2 minutes. So in this final 2 minutes, I want very quick thoughts from each of you, as in we've got a business audience listening locally. What's the big key thing that they can do practically now to help their business and help their duty of care to their employees? I'm not sure who wants to go first.
I'm happy just to say just something on the financial side, that there is, the government did offer some help out there for businesses. So to apply early. So there are grants for small businesses, potentially business rates relief, business interruption loans. So the sooner you find out about them, understand what that process is. If you're individuals, if you're self-employed, you may need to apply for universal credit or any other benefits that are available. And I think it's really important that that process starts now.
I would just say a couple of things. Number one is, don't worry, you're not in this alone. There are people that will be facing this issue, have faced this issue, will be facing the issues you are doing at the present moment in time. So ask, get help and advice. And on that point, there is a lot of official advice and guidance. There's a lot of unofficial stuff as well, which quite frankly is not worth reading. Go to the gov.uk website, go to the NHS website, use official sources of help and guidance and follow it. There's contact names on there, contact details, use it. There are grey areas, but this is completely unprecedented. Everything will not be sorted out, but get advice, guidance, keep up to date. Don't think because you read the website this morning, it's going to be the same this afternoon. It changes. Look for the advice, guidance, and whatever you do, don't suffer on your own. Ask people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd reiterate the communication piece. And what we tend to find with most workplace issues is if you can give your managers the right tools and the confidence to be having the conversations about coronavirus, getting them briefed would be absolutely our key message.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. Thanks very much, Alison, Chris, James. That's been a really interesting conversation. First of a series of 4 webinars, and I'm sure if you're not participating in them, you'll be tuning in. So thanks a lot, guys.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.